And welcome into the inaugural episode of Tiger Territory. We'll get more to that in a second. I am Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is a man who is always on beat. He is Cody Stavenhagen. Cody, how you doing?
Hey, doing great, Kieran. I'm excited. Yeah, Tiger territory. It's the start of a new era, maybe for the Tigers, but definitely for us here in the podcast realm. I'm excited about it.
During this playoff run, and we'll get to the series here in a second. During this playoff run, we actually did get a couple questions on Twitter. It's like, all right, well, if they turn the corner, you guys going to rename the pod? Uh, by pure coincidence, that is happening. So it's not our endorsement of the Tigers being a finished product by any stretch of the imagination. But we're in a new network. We have a new backing. Still going to expect the same from us, Cody and I, with some added extras that we will reveal to you in due time. But so that's my level of enthusiasm in my voice is that we had this new venture. Unfortunately, it coincides with the Tiger season ending. I'm not enthusiastic about that by any stretch of the imagination, but we do have something new cooking here with the podcast and moving forward. But it should be not a time for mourning for the Tigers. So we're recording this shortly after the Tigers season ended with a 7-3 loss to the Cleveland Guardians in Game 5 of the ALDS. And Cody, of course, was there and you can read his great stories on The Athletic if you are a subscriber, which you should be. Uh, I think the best way to start this out, Cody, is to just kind of take us there because we love vibes on this podcast, and this is the last vibes check of the season. And this was a clubhouse of a team that was young, excited, like they never gave up, they never say die, the gritty ties, like all that stuff. And then it kind of comes a little bit to a screeching halt in a way when you drop a 2-1 lead that like in a lot of ways feels too soon, I'm sure, for the guys in the clubhouse. So if you could, for the listeners here, kind of take us through this experience with this young team, experiencing the heartbreak of postseason baseball for the first time after such elation here the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it was definitely a strange one. I think after the Lane Thomas home run, a lot of people probably watching that game had a little bit of a strange feeling where you kind of know it's over, and then when it's actually over, it's kind of searching for the right way to feel. I mean, I think a lot of guys were balancing conflicting emotions. Like there's a level of pride in what this team accomplished. Every player I talked to pretty much said that. It's pretty willing to spin it forward to next year. And yet it comes in the backdrop of a game that was closer than the score suggested, a game that changed on one swing, 2 days removed from a game 4 loss where you were 7 outs away from winning on your home field and going to the ALCS. The team was never expected to be here. Like, so again, the house money thing that Matt Vierling has been talking about for a month plus is real. They were playing with house money. In a way, it's no sweat. In a way, well, uh, maybe you had your own money on the table a little bit when you got up 2-1 in the ALDS. And that's what I think led to this strange feeling. It reminds me, Kieran, of something you said last year when your Lions lost in the playoffs. Like you get up and it almost feels like the morning after a breakup. Like you're okay, like there's a big part of you that knows it's probably for the best, but there's still this little feeling of like, ugh, like what if, and I think you could feel that palpably even in the Tigers clubhouse after the game. Tarek Skubal probably wore it the hardest of anyone. Talked about the regret of his pitch. Said it's going to suck for a few days. Isn't sure if he's going to sleep tonight. But at the same time, he pointed to the graph of the playoff odds on his shirt and is really proud of what his team accomplished. Despite a difficult loss, he still pitched really well, even though it's not necessarily reflected in the box score. I think Skubal certainly should be proud of what he did both this year and in these playoffs as well.
What about AJ? So AJ's been through pretty much everything there is to go through in this game, and he's got obviously a young team that overachieved, like we've been talking about. What was kind of his message, to the fans via the media, and then whatever he shared about like how he gave a message to the team after after an abrupt ending to a season like that, knowing that they're young and this is their first go
Yeah,
round.
yeah, I think he's probably a good leader for this moment because he has been through it before. He knows what this feeling is like, and I think that was part of his message to the team. I mean, he said the line before, like once you play in one October, you want to play in all of them. And I think the team probably understands that a little bit more now. Typical AJ fashion, he was well spoken. He said the team's heartbroken for all the right reasons, and that kind of what's hints at what I was getting at, like these guys believed and they had a chance and they were proud of what they accomplished and what they did this season. And then when you lose, it's still heartbreaking. But AJ has lost to game 7 of the World Series in which he was up. His team was up in the 7th inning of that game. Like that is heightened compared even to this, from ultimate glory and history to it's a footnote that in another few years most people really aren't going to remember. Um, there's going to be a time in Tigers history where probably no one really remembers the 2024 DS, but I'll tell you what, for the immediate future, definitely this winter, everyone's going to remember both the run this team made and how it ended, losing a series that also felt very winnable.
And yeah, again, we're not gonna like rehash every like little thing from the game, but I did kind of want to get some insight from you regarding Kerry Carpenter. So
Hmm.
he I said this after game four. I was like, when you talk about lower body, looked like muscle injury stuff, like I had very serious doubts he was going to be able to swing a bat. And then it's kind of a little suspenseful on Saturday morning, and then it's like, oh, he's walking to the batting cage. Oh, there's like waiting till the last second to determine whether they're going to make a roster move. Then he comes up. I would almost say earlier than I mean everything was kind of moved up when Matthew Boyd gets pulled, right? So he comes in the fifth inning, I believe, and
Hmm.
smacks the ball to the wall. Maybe on another day, that's a home run. Maybe if he's just 100% healthy, that's a home run. Oh, it's like what it doesn't really matter. But he put a really good swing to it. He gets up in another spot later in the game and strikes out with the bases loaded. Uh, by the way, Class A did not care that Kerry Carpenter was hurt. I don't know if you caught this live, Cody, but he stared the hell down Kerry Carpenter, which I'm all for. I'm all for players expressing themselves, so I didn't mind that at all. But I was like, he remembers. He remembers the home run. But this is gonna get lost a little bit. And I don't want to use like Herculean or any like legendary Kirk Gibson type stuff or whatever. But at the same time, we do have to recognize that what Kerry Carpenter was, the fact that he was out there, period, and he did physically put the Tigers in the lead in this deciding game, and I think that's worth mentioning. But like your perspective on like how hurt was he really? Like what was he saying? What were they saying about him? And then were you kind of surprised when he put bat to ball there in the fifth inning with such ferocity?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing came down to like how did it impact his swing? When he came off the field in game 4 and I saw him after the game limping, I was like, yeah, that's a guy who's not going to be running for a while. But can he hit? And if he can hit, how much does it zap his power? That was the big question. There's that Friday Night Lights, the movie scene where they're talking about Booby Miles. It's like he ain't gonna play. I always thought like, yeah,
Roy
he
Williams said that,
he
by the way.
Roy Williams, correct. He's gonna play, or he's gonna be active, is what I would have said. I wasn't sure if he was gonna play. I almost thought he may have had a ton of value strictly as a decoy. It ended up being a valiant effort, kind of fitting of this Tigers team, just that he came in, he gets the big hit. I mean, a 1-run lead. I think a lot of people were booking tickets to New York. Like it was such a great moment that it felt like it was over. Not so in postseason baseball. And then of course he comes up, had a chance to put the team back ahead with a grand slam the next inning. Bases loaded, he strikes out. I think he was in some pain. I mean, we saw he couldn't stretch that first hit into a double. I don't think he would have been playing in the field anytime soon. He was grimacing after some of his swings, but there was enough in there that he was still pretty valuable against right-handed pitching. So yeah, a testament to Kerry Carpenter for sure. And yeah, I think even if he couldn't have hit, I think AJ and the Tigers should have just pretended he could, just to give Stephen Vogt something to think about through the course of that game.
Announce him in the starting lineup and then take him out like pinch hit him before he bats. Uh, so and again, there's a ton of storylines that we'll talk about here in the next weeks and months ahead. But I did kind of want to frame this season, this playoff run, as disappointing as it is. It's still like everybody knows, miraculous to get this far, to make the playoffs, I should say, and then to go to Houston and take the first two. It's a three-game series, and that could be the beginning of end of Houston. We don't know, but like they could be like the final nail in the coffin for the Astros run as we understand it. We'll see. But that was obviously a great moment. I'm very thankful I was able to be there. I'd never seen a postseason baseball game in person before. I got to see two, got to see a clincher. A lot of fun for me. So that's a memory I'll always have. Um, and then go to 5 games against a good Guardians team that, it's not like the Yankees are beating the doors off anybody. They have a good shot to beat the Yankees, I think. So we'll see what happens in the CS. But as disappointing as it is, and you try to counter that with how great it was to get this far, I kind of wanted to pose it like this. Was this, again, you're up 2-1 on the DS. Was this a missed opportunity or a missed chance? So the way I think about it is a missed opportunity, in my opinion, is this is what you're supposed to do and you fell short. And it's very precious time when you have players in the right circumstance to be able to get this far, and you were like the Astros had a missed opportunity for the last run, is how I would say it. If the Yankees don't make the World Series, that's going to be a missed opportunity. For teams like Kansas City and Detroit to get this far and to, obviously 1 game more for the Tigers, but it's a missed chance. You had the ability to do it, but you came up short. To expand that, I think the Orioles was a missed opportunity. They're certainly capable of, I don't know, winning a game in the playoffs. So that's kind of how I look at it. I look at this as a missed chance. Like they certainly could have gotten to the CS, but had they played the Yankees, you were more anticipating like, all right, well, this is probably where it strikes midnight on Cinderella, but this was still fun. But you probably wouldn't have been as emotionally up for this 5 game DS because of getting so far. So it feels a little bit worse. But I think it's a missed chance. It's a missed opportunity, I think is too strong. But to both of them hold that carrot of it's hard to get to the postseason. It's hard to consistently get to the postseason. Players get hurt, players get older. Every postseason run, I think, should be looked at as a missed chance. And then if your team is expected to do more, missed opportunity. So that's kind of how I look at it. Where does it kind of line with you?
Yeah, definitely more under the chance. Like the Tigers had a chance to be one of these historical anomalies, like '03 Marlins type, just kind of out of nowhere, ridiculous run. That's a chance they missed, but were they ever supposed to be here? No. Were they, well, based on strength of roster, one of the best 4 teams in baseball? Like, not even close. Even if you narrow it to, the second half on, where they one of the best 4 teams in baseball by record, they were, but there were, plenty of doubts, obviously, given the nature of this team and the way it's constructed and the way they won. They deserve credit for all that winning. It was proven real over a long stretch of time, but in an ideal world, this is going to be the worst Tigers team on paper for the next several years, compared to what's to come. But there was a little bit of a window, right? You had a winnable series against the Guardians. The Yankees are going to be favored, but I think it's really a vastly overrated Yankees team. Like I thought the Tigers had a chance to hold their own in that series. The question would have been, can their pitching scheme work in a 7 game setting? That would have probably created some concerns. But I'm not sure they would have been completely overmatched against the Yankees. So in a way, yeah, it's missing a chance to do something really special. Yet at the same time, you had a pretty special season given what you did and the odds the Tigers overcame, obviously, to get to that point.
So I would say to the listeners that how you feel about that opportunity versus chance thing. Think about your emotions during all those innings with runners in scoring position. So if you were like angry, then you look at it, I think, as a missed opportunity because you're thinking that this should, like, you should be doing X. Whereas if you're just like, man, that's tough, like, it just didn't work out, then it's a missed chance. So like I think like how the mindset works there will kind of play out what you think because there were a lot of positives to take from this playoff run and I don't want to not mention Parker Meadows again. I did it after game 4, but to tie Charlie Gehringer with anything warrants a mention on a podcast. I feel like that I feel like that kind of like there's a moment where BA on the broadcast was like the future is very bright for that Parker Meadows, you know, after like I think he stole third or something like that. And I was just like, take me back to early May. And in the playoffs, the national broadcasting is to say the future is very bright for Parker Meadows. Early rookie of the year favorite next season. He's eligible, right?
Park, is he? No, he's not.
I thought didn't they screw with the
No.
service time to where he was still eligible? No. Okay. I
Service
guess.
time he's eligible. He's not rookie eligible anymore.
Oh, okay. That's my bad. That's my bad there. But because really what it comes down to, like, I never thought the Tigers were outclassed. Now, had they like won 2 games, but they won them like 2-1 or the 3-0 types, and then had every game that they lost in the game 1 variety, then you could probably say, even though it was a 5 game series, you were kind of outclassed. Outside of game 1, every game was in the balance, right? And this score will look worse than what it was in the moment. And obviously they weren't outclassed by the Astros because they beat them. So they weren't outclassed. They were never exposed. Well, actually, maybe that's a good talking point. Were they exposed? Was the pitching exposed, in
I
your
think
opinion?
the offense was exposed. The pitching, I think, maybe began leaking some oil in just terms of some guys who had carried some heavy loads, Brisky, um, maybe even Scooble. Like, I don't think it was really exposed as much as maybe some fatigue began to set in, but I think the offense was exposed. I mean, you go 2 of 23 in games 4 and 5 with runners in scoring position. I guess it's a testament that you were competitive and generated enough base runners to be 2 for 23. But that was my huge concern. Like, is this where this team's still pretty strikeout prone? This team is 24th in OPS. Like, I had an exchange. I was talking about the 21 team and how much AJ Hinch bunted that year. Do you remember that? AJ Hinch, this analytical heavy manager, was bunting like way above league average. I was like, yeah, well, look at that lineup. The 2021 Tigers scored more runs in the regular season than the 2024 Tigers did. Like this offense, although it made some strides and it played kind of a scrappy brand of ball, I think that showed up brightly where they couldn't get a big hit. They didn't have guys who could really change the scoreboard when you needed it. I mean, granted, Torque had a drive and Cole Keith had a
Two
drive and Kerry
doubles today.
Carpenter gave on a ride, but they needed a couple balls to leave the yard with runners on base, and I think the second half of that order, especially, it starts to thin out quickly, and I think against a staff with a really good bullpen, that got exposed, especially in 4 and 5.
Yeah, I'm trying to grapple with how much I like the word exposed because nothing what you said was incorrect. But I guess because in my mind a lot of this was within the expected outcomes. Like if
Mhm.
it doesn't reach exposed level for me, if that makes sense. Because you look at 2 for 23, like is that a statistical anomaly?
Probably, yeah.
You know what I mean?
But I said this before the series. You have to put the ball in play.
Yeah.
Tigers struck out 16 times in game 5. They whiffed 39 swings. That is still a little bit of a flaw for this offense. Now, 2 for 23 overall, that's a little bit statistical anomaly for sure.
What did Matthew Boyd have like his first 4 or 5 outs were strikeouts?
Yeah, 5, I believe.
5. I mean,
You put
I
pressure on Matthew Boyd. If it weren't the playoffs, it had that Matthew Boyd outing type script. But
I was actually thinking, I was like, man, you might have gotten Boyd out too early. Like you did too much too soon without getting the runners across to get kind of the desired outcome there. But yeah, I mean yeah, because that's the thing. Like I'm gonna be consistent here. When the Tigers were on this amazing run to get to the postseason, one of the things that I said was it felt safe to buy in or like look at positively because it was within the realm of possibility. It wasn't, no one was going on some historic run in September, right? All the games kind of felt like, yep, that's the character, that's within the characteristic of the player, that's within the player profile. And the playoffs were the same way, and I'm going to be consistent in the sense that like this 2 for 23 is not going to make me say they were exposed because again, I felt like that was within the realm of expected outcomes, even if that is a little bit of, like I said, a statistical outlier. And we'll have plenty of time to talk about adding bats and this, that, the other thing. But I thought that what you said about the back end of the lineup was very true. It felt like there was like two problems with the 2 for 23 thing, in my opinion. It felt like a lot of those, like I'm saying feel, I don't have it jotted down each time. It felt like a lot of those were with the, the Rogers and the Sweeneys of the world coming to the plate. And then it also felt like all right, you got two quick outs, either Torque or Parker or somebody gets a double, and then the next guy up, it's the back end of the order. He strikes out or grounds out or whatever, and that's another at bat with a runner in scoring position. And I understand that, but did anyone really feel like that was an offensive output inning? You see what I'm saying? So like those are the kind of things that come to mind when I see like the 2 for 23. Whereas I just don't think I kind of almost chalk that up to like the randomness of baseball because again, it's like when these guys are coming up in the lineup, made a big factor there, and so like it's hard for me to get outraged about it, but also you just can't have that. Like I said after game 4, there was still a lot of can't haves in this game, you
Yeah,
know?
well, and that goes back to like on paper, are the Tigers one of the best four teams in baseball? Like, no. Like, no one knows who anybody in this roster is, like nationally. That's not to like talk bad about this team that obviously did incredible things. And to spin it forward a little bit, we're gonna spend all offseason talking about like, how much offense do they need to add? But that is a big question. And I'm sure we'll hear from Scott Harris and AJ Hinch here in the coming days for kind of an end of season wrap up. And I'll be highly curious to see kind of the tone of how Scott talks about things. They're not going to go out and sign Juan Soto because they made the postseason. But from conversations I had the past week, like I do think there's a little bit of an eye opening to like, okay, imagine if we had like one more legit dude in this order, or like one really good guy and another guy who's like more veteran and maybe has a little more pop than what we currently have. Like suddenly you can see a world where maybe this team could enter, I don't want to say how good, but like you could feel much better about this team on paper next year with not a whole lot of addition, but just one or two of the right additions. And probably at least one of those needs to require handing out a little bit of change. But like like, does that reality set in? Does that feel more palpable, especially after the way you lost this series? I don't think one series is going to influence Scott Harris's decision making, but it does kind of clarify a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and again, like I'm still going back to the things that I was saying during the run to the playoffs was the nothing was happening that was fooling anybody. Nobody is given a free pass into the lineup next season because you were a starter on a team that was 7 outs away from going to the ALCS. Like
Mhm.
there's no fool's gold to be had in this batting order. I feel like everything that we kind of thought about, except maybe one. The one exception maybe to that would be Jahan, who probably had his best at bats in the postseason all year.
It really
Uh,
did, enough that it gives you something to think about. A guy who it's like really hard to see a roster spot for him, but it's like, still kind of like that bat. But that
yeah,
that
so,
does lead to the other question. Like, you, are you going to just run this back? And I think the answer has to be a pretty resounding no. I think you can feel
yeah.
really good about what you did this season and see it as a perfect foundation to get a little more aggressive. I'm not talking spending, to quote John Middleton, stupid money, but I'm talking about just adding something that's a step above the Mark Cannas of the world. And you can still do some of this mix and match, some of the not small ball, but almost like money ballish type things. I think that's going to be in this organization's DNA for years to come. But we've seen the volatility of baseball both work for like a 2 month stretch and then kind of hit you in the mouth real quick in games 4 and 5. I do think that's a sign that although you had a magical season, the overall talent level is going to have to increase, and some of that's going to have to be external.
See, part of it that fans and media are going to have to look at it as is that the one thing that this run did was it validated the hell out of everything Scott Harris has said and done.
True.
So, like, now that being said, like, I'm going to remain consistent in the fact, to piggyback what you said, is that, like, you have to be, and this is when I thought they were going to miss the playoffs, but I said, you have to do a tier above what you've done basically the
Yeah.
past two off seasons. And I think that's more abundantly clear that that has to be the case.
Yeah.
But Scott Harris took over a team that was, I don't want to say a mess, but it was a team that
I think you'd call it a mess.
at best you could say there was no sense of direction
Yeah.
other than you had some young players that were talented and of course AJ Hinch. And year two, like I sometimes I drive to work and I'm like I kind of chuckle. I'm like, Scott Harris got this team to the playoffs at year two. Year two, we got this team to the playoffs. Second and into the second round. So
Yeah, and I think it's Scott Harris officially a friend of the podcast now. I think it's still
yes.
like I think he had an imprint philosophically on a lot of stuff that happened. In terms of actual personnel moves, how much of this was his doing? Uh, I mean, you can point some things. Tyler Holton, absolutely. He had a say in the pitching strategy these guys used in the second half. The Trey Sweeney acquisition ended up, being a helpful thing for the team. But it's still not like Scott Harris's biggest test, I think, especially because they won, is this offseason we're looking at right now. I'll Heck, I remember that 2021 team once they started winning, being on the field where Al Avila jokingly said, like, "What are we doing? Now we have expectations." And presciently enough, expectations happened. The next year's team did not meet those, and Al lost his job because of that. Like now there are expectations, which will only put more pressure on Scott Harris to make the right additions for this roster.
So Bob Nightingale, shortly after the game, posted on Twitter and he said, Guardians win the ALDS, blah, 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 blah. This amazing run for the Tigers ends. But when they show up to Lakeland in Florida in February, they will do so as the favorites in the AL Central. And it's not an outlandish thing to say, but it still kind of smacks you in the face a little bit. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I'm
it's a little bold. Like I'm not saying he's wrong. I In a way, I hope he's right. I'd love to cover a team that's favorites to win the division. Like that'd be different than anything I've ever experienced in my career. Um, I think there's a lot of offseason left. Like, what does the sale of the Twins mean for their offseason? The Royals, you know, might end up being pretty aggressive and they have some pretty good pitching. And then the Guardians just won this division despite doing nothing all last offseason. Like, what is it? I think, it's going to be a pretty competitive division next year. I would kind of lean toward maybe the Tigers or Royals end up being the favorite, but we have to see what all these teams do because they all have some weaknesses and could use additions before we really know how that's going to shake out.
Hey, can we say this is a good division? Because it was still a dismissed division
Yes.
because everyone was like, well, if you take away the Royals or the Tigers' record against the White Sox, they're this, which is funny that we're using that argument in a more balanced schedule era, but that's just how bad the White Sox were, you know.
Yeah.
But to me, like again, the Royals take the Yankees the 4 games. You could argue that should have at least been a five game series. Yeah, obviously the Guardians had their chance to continue their off season or excuse me postseason, and the Tigers, took down the Astros and gave the Guardians all they could. And Minnesota is still like they were
And we talk about like
a
on
fine
paper,
team the
like
majority
on
of
in terms of
the
like
team.
sheer talent, Minnesota might be the best team in the division. They didn't make the postseason. So like, yeah, three postseason teams plus the Twins, like that's pretty good. And I would think at least three of those teams probably get better this coming off season. And then the White Sox have nowhere to go but up, although they have a long way to go up. Like, yeah, no, I think it's a good division.
Yeah, I got a lot of things rattling my brain, but we have so much time to talk about it this off season, and we'll spend some time kind of recapping a little bit on a player position basis, what we saw this postseason, and then kind of spin it forward to what to expect in the off season, and then come spring training. So we don't want to use all our best pitches today, Cody. But any final thoughts here for this team? You were there from the beginning, from pitchers and catchers, and all the way to the end here in mid-October. A longer season with the Tigers, and I think any of your readers or yourself, your editors, anticipated. But any final thoughts on this iteration of the team as we're fresh off the season ending?
Um, they only played 2 rounds of the playoffs, but it felt like a month or like a year unto itself. It felt like a long time. Kind of a long time living in a different world than we were living in June, early July. So that was cool, and it made it more rewarding. I know it was very rewarding for the fans who turned out in full force to see a playoff game at Comerica Park. That's really my main thought. Like, what a rewarding year, and of course, thanks so much to everyone who has read my work at The Athletic and followed along through the turning the corner days. Many of you from the start, and yeah, I hope you'll support us and now on this new venture at Tiger Territory.
Yeah, and I guess I'll kind of wrap up by saying, like I'm a historian of the game. I love reading about like the classic teams, and it's like when did they know in 68 that this team was special? Like when did they know in 84 that this team was special? And obviously those are World Series teams. So like what how did I feel in '06 that this could be a different year? Maybe it was when I went to the game for my birthday in April. They were playing Texas and Chris Shelton launches 2 home runs. Like they're like, oh, there might be something here. And as an adult, I had never experienced that in real time. And so it was a pleasure to experience like here's a team doing something special. Now, obviously, they felt short of being able to raise any banner, whether that be division, pennant, World Series, but it was still like one of those things, the gritty Tigers, the don't let the Tigers get hot stuff. Like I'll be able to kind of remember being there in real time for something that was just so fun to watch. And to follow and to in my own small way kind of be a part of doing this podcast, which as Cody said, now Tiger Territory. I wish we were opening this up with an ALCS coming up, but you don't always get the most happy of endings, but this was still a very fun season. Watching, listening, reading, doing this with you, Cody, and I know it's going to be a great off season with many storylines and a lot of interest, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do this. We have turned the corner, and now we are Tiger territory. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I am Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.